Good afternoon, and welcome to this week's episode of Supply Chain Talk, our first episode of 2025. Our main subject today is going to be a supply chain that's more visible to you and the board. And first of all, as usual, we'll discuss a topical news item related to our main subject. In terms of the format, you should be able to open up your chat panel to add your insights and any questions you may have. So please do so. And as in 2025, just as in 2024 and previous years, we will be awarding a Supply Chain Talk mug to the contribution we find most valuable. We'll try and pick up as many comments and questions as we can, but I know the audience always find them really useful to look at and interesting to see your thoughts being shared. So let me now introduce my three guests, the first of whom is Chris Redding, Supply Chain Director for UK and Ireland at Martin Brower. He's based near London, and Martin Brower is a global leader in supply chain solutions, operating out of 78 facilities across 18 countries. And Chris has worked in supply chains for 26 years in Courtaulds Textiles, AB InBev, and McDonald's. And at McDonald's, his roles included supply chain manager and also purchasing and agriculture manager. He took up his current role at Martin Brower in 2017. And in his spare time, Chris enjoys the great outdoors. And last September, he and his leadership team walked between two of their distribution centres, completing 3 marathon distances in 3 days. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Alistair.
My second guest is Mohammed Nabil, who is head of supply chain for Nestlé in the Middle East and North Africa. He's based in Jordan, and over the past 13 years, Nabil has passionately navigated the dynamic landscape of supply chains. His expertise spans logistics, demand and supply planning, project management, and strategic procurement. And presently, he serves as head of supply chain for the Levant cluster in Nestlé, overseeing operations in 5 countries. And Nabil plays football. He played football at a semi-professional level for 14 years. I'm sure you're still pretty nifty. And he is now a dedicated runner preparing for a marathon in June. Where's that one going to be, Nabil?
Probably in Europe. We're looking now for a place to do it, but probably in Amsterdam.
Excellent. Okay, well, good luck with that one. And finally, my third guest is Panos Anastasiou, who is VP of Procurement for Europe and GB at McCain Foods. He's based in Lille in France. And Panos has 20 years experience of procurement and supply chain, mainly at Procter & Gamble, and since 2022 at McCain Foods. And he also, he says, has over 40 years of video gaming experience. And he says that sometimes supply chain can be like a video game, which I think is true when there's so many things going on. It would be great if we could just move things around as easily as on a video game. Anyway, welcome all three of you. And let's move to our news item, which was a widely reported story last week in the UK in all the main newspapers. We've got a link to the coverage in the Times newspaper published last week. And it's all about Shein, the Chinese fast fashion giant, and they were in front of a parliamentary committee being questioned ahead of their planned or proposed flotation on the London Stock Exchange. So, it's a kind of part of the regulatory process. And their sort of appearance at this committee made the headlines because their general counsel repeatedly failed to answer questions over the origins of the company's cotton sourcing. So it's rather sort of thrown the whole flotation into doubt because of the way they reply to these questions. And I'll quote actually Liam Byrne, the chairman of the committee, because it kind of sums it up. He said, in response to the lack of kind of information being given, you've given us almost zero confidence in the integrity of your supply chains. You can't even tell us what your products are made from. You can't tell us much about the conditions which workers have to work in. So it really couldn't be more damning. And given that the potential flotation is estimated to value the business at something like £50 billion, this is about as big as it can get in terms of supply chain visibility, and there's really nothing more board level than this kind of thing. And it kind of shows that supply chain visibility, could become a major hurdle to Shein's London IPO. And it's worth bearing in mind that this sort of headlines, doesn't exactly, attract customers, the consumer, to buy from you if they have sort of doubts about your ethics as a business. So turning first to you, Chris, I mean, what are your thoughts on Shein's true supply chain visibility? I mean, they must have surely had this information, and how do you think they've handled this?
Yeah, well, they've obviously handled it very poorly. This is the biggest fashion retailer in the world we're talking about. They have got thousands of suppliers producing tens of thousands of SKUs in tens of millions of units. They're dominant players. They're dominant in North and South America. They have presence in Europe across most markets, Australia. And they're I guess they built their business around speed to market. They spot and adopt trends. They manufacture and they get those products to retail as quick as they can at the absolute lowest price point. And you can't do that without a super efficient supply chain, and you can't have a super efficient supply chain without visibility.
Yes.
I would suggest that you succeed in that arena by making your supply chain your point of difference, and your strength above everything else. So to suggest that they do not have the visibility, I think is ludicrous. But also, this you have to also remember that London wasn't their first choice. They originally wanted to float in the US, but didn't want the exposure of a public inquiry. So I would suggest that they have the visibility, that they just don't want to share it. And why would that be, unless it's counter to the statements they make?
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. Now, Bill, what do you reckon on the story?
Look, I think it brings me back to one good example of visibility in supply chain as well, where because I work in the food industry, in 2019, Ghana and Ivory Coast, who combined produce around 70% of the cocoa beans in the world, they came with a program called LID, which is Living Income Differential, which puts a minimum wage for the farmers. So they ensure that farmers can afford a living working on their own farms. And then the big companies endorsed this. They said, look, we are very much into this, despite the fact that this was actually an increase of $400 back then into the cost per ton, which back then represented around 20%. Despite the 20% price increase or cost increase for the big companies, every big company came to Ivory Coast and Ghana and they said, look, we endorse this program. We want to be sourcing responsibly. We want to be one of the companies that are making sure that when we go and source, everyone is taking their own rights. So that brings me back to this example that happened in 2019, where big companies were basically endorsing the fact that farmers should be affording a living through the work they do in the farms.
Okay, that's a really interesting example. Can I just ask Nabil then? So did that? I thought you were going to go on to say that some people were sort of undercutting it and were not managing that in their supply chains. But was there pretty good compliance? Did as far as did people honor the new regulation and make sure
definitely yes. Yeah, definitely yes. Especially the big companies, because today, when you talk about the big suppliers, which is 70% of the total or the global supply, then there are also big consumers. So the big companies, they represent around 50% of the total demand. So if the 50% agree, then the rest will follow.
Okay,
which actually happened, and this was endorsed by the big companies.
Yeah, that's a fantastic example. Thank you very much. Panos, what's your view of the Shein story?
Well, overall, and just to build on Nabil's point, I mean, all of us, or most of us, have families, kids, acquaintances, and hopefully all of us want to live a better place than we found it. So if we want to build a better, brighter future, it is our responsibility communally in the companies we work, the communities we work, to Nabil's point in Africa, to to do a better job at building a better future, and that means building a better supply chain. And to Sheehan's point, to the case in point, you're going to be listed in one of the biggest stock exchanges in the world. There is going to be public scrutiny. There is a lot of effort on force for good and do good for the planet. These questions will be asked. So if you don't know, assuming that is a correct statement, which I agree with Chris, is probably not, then you are naive and ill-prepared. And if you do know and you're not disclosing it, you're lying, and then you're losing even more potential customers. If you do know, try to do something about it, be honest. The truth will set you free. Say the truth, say you're trying to resolve it, say you're taking steps and efforts, and do show eventually that these efforts pay off. And at least you're doing your part for the little sphere we all live on.
Yeah, no, great point, Panos. Thank you.
Sorry, just to interrupt. I think you know, if you look at Sheehan's history, you know that it's littered with issues, and you know, and you know, if it's not those talked about in the inquiry, it, you know, there's trademark disputes, there's copying, there's financial irregulations, you know, potentially, you know, there is a history here that you know, that I don't think anyone should be proud of, and you know, to the points made, it's you know, there should be that integrity that is challenged before they're allowed to list. But you know, they're also a unicorn of unicorns, and you know, it's kind of like the pull and draw of the what it will bring to the market will, I guess, be compelling. It's, I hope, that they have to stand up and be counted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, good, great. Well, thanks for those examples and thoughts. Let's move to our main our main discussion topic, which is a supply chain that's more visible to you and the board. And our first discussion point on the agenda is presenting complex supply chain challenges clearly without sparking panic. So we've got a few sort of points really sort of bound up here, and I'm sure that many of us, you know, in the audience as well as us discussing it, have had the experience, the difficulty of presenting to board level directors who, frankly, may not have a detailed understanding of how the modern supply chain works and the complexities and so on. So Chris, turning to you again first, what are your tips for explaining a new challenge to the board? And also on that word of panic, have you ever been in a situation where you've had to kind of basically say to the board, hey, there's this issue, it's only just come to light and it's pretty serious, and how do you kind of, you know, communicate that kind of thing as well?
Yeah, on the second point, you know, the industry that I work in is you know, we've had multiple challenges, you know, over forevermore. You know, I work in food, and you know, within that we have just-in-time products, just-in-time produce, and bakery, dairy goods, you know, and you know, just before Christmas, we had a crisis in Storm Dara that closed Holyhead Port, and made the transport of goods from Ireland, from UK GB into Ireland, very difficult. And you know, we have a supply chain in Ireland that is built off a consolidation of product in the UK that's moved to Ireland. You know, so we you know, that was just 2 months ago, and you know, I can go back, and I think the important thing is always to be calm, and to be you know, to make sure that you are data led, to make sure that data doesn't always lead the conversation. I think when you're talking about, though, you know, the communicating complexities, I think that sometimes supply chain people can come across a bit more technical than we actually think we are. You know, to us, it is a lot of common sense. As I said, I think it's important to be data-led, but not let the data lead the conversation. The analytics and the insights that, you know, you take from the data alongside your knowledge and experience are really, really what matters. If you can, you know, if you can simplify the challenge into component parts, simplify your language. The moment you slip into the abbreviations that we all love, you'll start to lose them.
Yeah.
You know, and outside of external events, you know, having great BCP plans are really important. You know, as I've said, we've had lots of incidents down the years, from, you know, the loss of facilities due to animal protesters, through to storms and acts of God, the Suez Canal, you know, issues, you know, we've had lots, you know, and there's those that you can't control, you know, and you have to accept that, but you have to remain calm and come with solutions. No,
Yes.
don't, you know, it should be an inform to the board. You shouldn't be passing off the, you know, if there's important decisions to be made that impact the business or impact the customer, then absolutely. But as much as possible, it should be an inform rather than looking for solutions.
Yeah.
You know, and outside of external events that you know, that you can't control, a lot of challenges that are escalated to the board level are when decisions or plans are made in isolation. Make sure, you know, that there's strong collaboration across your organization.
Yeah.
The supply chain always has a seat at the table alongside sales, marketing, finance, operations, and that voice is, you know, is loud and it's heard. And so those challenges are understood and can be managed before it gets to that point where you're taking it to the board.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. Lots of great thoughts there. Nabil, what are your thoughts? What's your experience of when you've really had to present a complex supply chain challenge to the board?
I think Chris said it well, where you simplify the language, because not everyone understands the supply chain language. We tend to have a lot of terminologies, a lot of abbreviations. So you've got to simplify the language so that it's simple and understandable for everyone. That's the first thing that you need to do. Second is you look into your board, put yourself in their position, and think what they want to hear from you. So are they interested to know when the product will arrive? Probably not. But probably they are interested to know the financial impact of the delays of those products. So that they can plan for their own P&L. So bringing the visibility and linking it to their own KPIs, that's the most important thing. So today, if the product is delayed, and I'm bringing the news that the product is delayed, but inside the country, I have enough stocks to cover me till the product is till the product arrives, then that's absolutely fine. There is no impact for them.
Yeah.
But today, if you come and say, no, I'll be out of stock and I'll be having a financial impact of X million of US dollars, that's a totally different story.
Yes.
So again, put yourself in the position of the top management or the board, and think what they will be interested to know, what they will be interested to listen to in your problem.
Yeah, some great advice there. Panos, what do you want to add to that?
Yes, and I'd like to clarify at some point, Chris actually used the word BCP for people listening in, business continuity plans, because
good example. It's easy to slip into those abbreviations. Yes.
I mean, we're all like, yeah, BCPs, we all need to have BCPs, and people are like, what is a BCP? In terms of you know, escalating big topics to management, I am blessed to live in an environment where I work in with regions, and I have teams in 2 different regions, and GB is one region for us, continental Europe is another, and these regions have leadership teams, and I am leadership team. So we talk on a monthly basis. We have a forum where we talk everything and anything, whether it's P&L or innovation or procurement topics, and supply chain disruptions come up there. And we're blessed to have our CFO there, myself there, our supply chain leader there, our president there. So between a couple of us, our operations leader, the people that run the plants, are there. So we are blessed to be able to make choices immediately of, like, here's the implication. We have an issue in the Middle East. The Suez Canal has threats. Rates are going up. We're having container availability. Do we reroute? Do we actually ask sales to cut product? Do we do promos later or now? Do we choose to go to another region and ship from another region? So we're a very hands-on working team, hands-on keyboards or folks around the table. So we make choices there. And when things go really above us and they go to a board level, it's mostly, to Chris's point, an FYI. This is happening. This is what we're doing. This is the implication. And at the end of the day, we own the regional P&L. So if there is any impact, we will manage it accordingly.
Yeah. I think Panos has made a really good point in in the importance of having supply chain at the top table. You know, I think you can tell the depth of the organization. I think if they have supply chain as a VP placement, I think those that don't consider supply chain a support function, and you know, and would suggest they have more challenges than most when it comes to their supply chain. Yeah. You know, I've worked in organizations that do and don't have supply chain at the very top table, and those with supply chain represented are better organizations, have better availability of product, and are more efficient.
Yeah, no, certainly, Panos, what you're describing there sounds like a really effective organization, a really good team working, having that regular forum. That's really powerful.
We're not perfect. We make mistakes. We can be dysfunctional like anyone else, but at least we have the right people around the room to, you know, the best information we have, and we need to make decisions with the information is at hand. Do we have perfect data? Absolutely not. But at least we cannot be to dysfunctionality of analysis paralysis. Here's the data, here's the situation, here's what we're going to do, allocate actions, move on by function. And to Chris's point, yes, we do have a VP of supply chain, so that helps us move faster.
Yeah. No, anyway, and those comments about data, that moves us nicely to our second agenda point, which is using real-time data and analytics to help your board grasp problems and solutions. So I guess we're sort of hearing a little bit, Panos, from what you're doing, that real-time data, you know, sounds like that's really valuable in helping people understand the issues and make decisions. But is there sometimes a risk that the level of detail in the real-time data is just not appropriate for board-level audiences? It just gets you into the detail. However, you know, sometimes just one single example can mean an awful lot more than tons of analysis and reports and KPIs. Just saying, here's an example of this is going to happen because this one product had this one issue. So Chris, what are your thoughts on how best to use real-time data and analytics in communicating with the board?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the industry in which you operate. I mean, you know, we've talked about food service here a lot. You know, each of us work in that environment, you know, where we're working with fresh produce, you know, and you know, we're supplying into retail or into the quick service restaurant environment, as I am myself. You know, we at Martin Brower, we supply, as I said, produce, buns, dairy, alongside frozen and ambient goods. You know, so actually real-time data is really important to us, and it's important to us in that we're working with the restaurants that we supply, but also the suppliers that supply into us. You know, when we're working in constrained supply scenarios, we need to be able to react to the impact on the customer, on the supply chain. You know, the way we operate, you know, with our customer, our main customer is McDonald's. You know, we've got access to their sales and inventory data at each of their sites. You know, we can manipulate, control their safety stocks, control smooth demand to ensure that, you know, they remain in stock, you know, and trading for as long as they can. But also we work with the likes of McCain, you know, and we make sure that the S&OP, S&OE, sales and operations planning and sales and operations execution data is flowing from the restaurant to the supplier. And transversely, McCain are talking to us about crop and yield for months in the future. You know, so that we are working together. And you know, the real-time data, though, comes in when you're managing, for me, when you're managing that constrained supply situation. I can imagine, though, that some industries, it can be misleading. You know, for some industries, you know, they're not interested in a blip. You know, they're interested in they're not interested in a blip until it becomes a trend. So you know, so you need to ensure, I think, that you really understand what the data is telling you and how important the insights you've taken from it are before you rely on it to solve problems.
Yeah. Okay. So Nabil, over to you. I mean, I guess Chris was just mentioning, you know, how it's important perhaps to the board are more interested in trends rather than specific sort of day to day. How do you tend to use data, that real-time data?
I think the real-time data as well is very powerful when it comes to crisis times. So it brings me back to 2021 when the Evergreen vessel blocked Suez Canal.
Yeah.
And then back then I was managing the supply of raw materials into 6 factories across the Middle East and North Africa region. And it was a nightmare to say the least, where back then we had our control towers and we were monitoring where every container is. So a lot of rerouting happened. And then our factories were running on a very, very low stock levels in most of our raw materials. And then this is where you look into the problem end to end. And you look into the raw material that you have when your production line stop. You work with your colleagues in supply planning and demand planning, and look with sales on how you can feed the market. How can you supply the market to make sure that your customers do not go out of stock? Again, the problem is in one end of supply chain, but you have to look at it end to end. And that's the power of having a real time data, I would say. So knowing which customer is selling what we will prioritize on our production lines, which SKUs to produce, which to stop production for, and then prioritize based on when the raw materials will be available in our factories. So again, in crisis time, it's very, very powerful, and it gives you an edge over any other one that is competing with you in the market.
Yeah. And in that example, Nabil, did you have to go to your board or your top management and say, look, here's the situation, who gets the product? You know, there's a shortage, you make that final decision, you present the information and they can judge it?
Exactly. Look, as Panos was just mentioning, that's an FYI. So this is a situation, this is what we have done, this is what we have prioritized, those are the SKUs, those are the customers, and this is what we will do. That's an FYI. Back then it was under control, so there were no major gaps in terms of P&L. So so the decision was taken on how to prioritize it within the team that was working on it.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, if I jump on this for a moment, and you heard it from both Nabil and Chris, one-time information on real-time data is useful for the working team that is troubleshooting or actioning the problem, but for even senior leadership teams and not even the board, you need a video versus a snapshot of what's going on for them to understand the trend implications. And here's where we started, here's where we ended up, and here's how it fluctuated or not. I used to, just another example, I used to have, when I used to work for Procter & Gamble, I used to have a VP of both supply chain and manufacturing that was super data obsessed. And it can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. If you're too much into the data, you're too much detail oriented. And then if you look at the dashboard every morning and you look at the one plant has a productivity of 80%, and you're starting calling your plant managers of like, why are you at 80 versus 85 versus 87? You're not letting people grow and take care of the problems. You're micromanaging. And you shouldn't be doing that. So data is a tool like anything else, like nuclear energy. It's how you use it. And you can use it for good and you can use it for bad.
That's a very good point, though. It is again, how do you, and I'm sure we've all been there, you know, the senior management, oh, I want a daily report on this, and you're right, it's kind of you just, I'm giving you the information, but just, you know,
you shouldn't be doing
don't
anything.
Speak to anyone, speak to me, but don't speak to other people without kind of, you know, otherwise it can be counterproductive, can't it?
Oh, I had another president that that person likes to be hands-on as well, and I'm like, look, please, I need you to be more customer facing. To Chris's point, like, go talk to McDonald's and let's sell more French fries to McDonald's. Leave the day-to-day operations to me or to us as a team. You're way more valuable out there growing revenues and doing new initiatives, innovation, versus getting 50 tons more from a factory on a daily basis. That's not what we're paying you to do.
I think you wander into the territory whereby if you're sharing data, openly sharing the data, you can double the workload that you have, because you have other people, whether it be the board or customers, that are using the data for their own insights, and then it creates more questions, stimulates more conversation, it stimulates more, I think the data, the use of the data should be kept as close to the source as possible. And I think that it's what, as I said earlier, it's the analytics and the insights that the data that provide you that aid you in the communication, and rather than just sharing the data.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as well, at some point, data can become a double-edged sword, where there is a very thin line between sharing the right data and sharing data. So you've got to find the right balance where you share the right reports to the right audience, because at some point you can have an army behind or in front of the screen working on reports that no one would look at.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I worked with a company last year, or was it the year before, and they had a ridiculous daily report. It took one or two people hours every day. I mean, it was literally half a person was just, half a full-time person that's all they did. And this report was enormous. It was like, 20 tabs of a spreadsheet, and no one looked at it. It was just like a total waste of time. And one of the things was to kind of really streamline it, make sure you could put something in the body of an email and do it quickly, and then that was useful information to keep the trend going. Let's move to our third discussion point, which is practical ways to reassure the board of the organization's resilience and preparedness. So I guess here, again, we're talking about how can we best communicate data and communicate and supply chain visibility with the board to reassure them. And I suppose KPI dashboards can certainly be useful in showing performance levels and trends and things like capacity utilization and service levels. And I guess just having good quality data and showing that you're using it is a big reassurance to senior management as well. So turning back to you, Chris, I mean, what are the best ways in your mind to make the supply chain visible to the board at the right level of detail?
Yeah, I think KPI dashboards based on really good quality data, they're really important, but I don't think they necessarily stimulate reassurance at board level. To your point, how many reports actually get read, and the how many reports are tailored to be read. I mentioned simplification of complexities and communication earlier, and I think that really remains important here. I think in my experience, we've tried as much as possible to physically expose the board to the supply chain as much as possible, showcase it, bring it into the boardroom, or bring the boardroom out to the supply chain. Suggest they have board meetings at suppliers' facilities to bring them closer to the suppliers and build trust in the supply chain. It's really, really important to make it, for me, and to make it as short and transparent as possible. As I said earlier, McDonald's are our biggest global customer. In the UK, our facilities that serve McDonald's are dedicated to them. The restaurants can only buy their goods from us, and we can only procure the goods at the set by McDonald's from the suppliers set by McDonald's. Yeah, and I was at McDonald's. I think a good example. I was at McDonald's during the horse meat scandal. And we knew, and the board knew, that we couldn't be impacted by it. This was finally borne out by the Chris Elliott's report, who called McDonald's out alongside Morrison's, I think, at the time, for the resilience and the transparency of their short integrated supply chain.
Okay, just as a reminder to the audience, this is a few years back when horse meat was basically being used as part of sort of meat products used in hamburgers and the like, and clearly it was a pretty big scandal that some, particularly I think one or two of the sort of anyway, I won't name names, but some companies, not McDonald's, did indeed find traces of horse meat in their cheaper products, and as Chris says, McDonald's and other leading organizations could really demonstrate their supply chain visibility was and tracking was good enough to be resistant. Just before we move on to you, Nabil, we've had an interesting comment from Karim, who talks about linking to the comments related to business language and relevance of the supply chain. And he just mentions that he strongly believes that boards and other key stakeholders that data is more important, and translating it into what's more important than data is to translate that into valuable and actionable insight. So I suppose that's kind of kind of very much sort of reinforcing what we've been saying. I think it's an interesting point you make, Chris, as well, that sometimes I think our board level directors will probably have, if it's a store, it's a retail outlet, they would have gone into some of their stores and seen their nice new flagship stores. But how many would have taken the trouble to go and see a major distribution center, which is just as important, but it's a little bit more behind the scenes. So ideas to encourage the odd senior level meeting to take place at facilities like that can be really powerful to make them realize just what is happening, so effectively day to day. Nabil, let's move to you though. Did you want to kind of pick up on this sort of practical ways to reassure the board of an organization's resilience and preparedness?
Yeah, I think it's important to show to the board how you are prepared for the tough times, crisis times. So as Chris mentioned at the start, where he said BCPs, it's very important to reassure everyone what are your business continuity plans. So I was put in that situation probably 3 months back. One of the countries I manage is Lebanon, where it was under war. And before the war starts, there were a lot of signs that it will start. So we prepared ourselves. We have set our strategy onto how we will tackle supply chain when the war starts. And for me, it was a privilege to be there at that time, where we presented to the board our strategy. We reassured everyone how we will be tackling this. And when things went wrong, I mean, when the war started, we were pretty much ready. We were ahead of our competition in the market. And it entailed a lot of sales because people would go and panic buy when there is a war. So they go to the food items and they panic buy, they overstock themselves in their own household. So it was a lot of benefit to the company because we prepared well, because we knew it's coming. So with our own BCPs, it was kind of very important to us in the company and to the board as well.
Yeah, that's a great example, Nabil. Thank you. It just shows the real value of that. Now, Panos, I know you're going to pick up. We've had a really interesting question from Siobhan asking, how have you managed to get your foot in the door and ensure that supply chain voices are amplified with your executive and the board? So, yeah, Panos, that's great if you want to pick up on that one.
I love this question. So, good thing is that the three panelists we have here today, both Nabil, Chris, and I, we all work for companies that have mature organizations, and procurement and supply chain are not support functions. They are a function like everyone else with a seat at the table. How to get there if you don't have the seat at the table and you're in a different organization, that is a long answer and it's a journey. So I'm not gonna go there in detail. Try your best, be the best procurement supply chain professional you can be. And the more results you bring, the more, good work gets more good work. And then to the other question that Shobhan had about how do you get the voice amplified? It needs to be, we said it before, it needs to be simple. As an example, our chief procurement officer has a monthly meeting with our CEO, CFO globally. And in that monthly meeting, the regional VPs of procurement that we are, and I'm one of them, we actually put here's top projects, like one-liner items. Here's new supply chains, one-liner items. Here's supply chain risks that we either tackled, one-line item, or we potentially expect, and here's what we're going to do about it. Because the data, the insight, and the action. And if there is any suggestion or any more question from our CEO or CFO, it may come back to us. But 95% of the time, people go oh, you're aware, you have an idea of what you want to do, and you're on it. Good. Next.
Yeah. Okay. Those are some great thoughts there. Well, let's finish off briefly with a sort of final sort of closing question to each of you. And what would your advice be, to put in place the most effective supply chain visibility to senior management? So I think we talked about lots of things, but kind of in a minute, what would you recommend our audience to do if they're battling with the sort of questions that Siobhan's raised? Chris, first of all.
Yeah, I think make sure you lead with the data, but don't let the data lead the conversation. As I said earlier, I think simplify as much as you can and be as transparent as you can. But talk, as Nabil said, walk in their shoes and talk in their talk if you can. The importance of the supply chain. Sometimes, unfortunately, it takes a crisis for organizations to realize the importance of their supply chain, and I don't wish that on Siobhan or anyone else, but if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. But I think the I think COVID has taught a lot of organisations the importance of their supply chain. Keep it simple and clear and to the point.
Yeah. Okay. So we're not suggesting blocking the Suez Canal to create a crisis, and then you can all shine and say, "Hey, we solved it." Nabil, what would your advice be?
No, I think again, Chris mentioned it very well. So I would just add that again, simplification is important. Using a very simple language. Try to think of what others would be interested to know, not what you are interested to show. Last but not least is to know which forums to share this data and this information in. So in most of the companies, there are forums where supply chain would be sharing the issues and hurdles that they are facing. I have one on a monthly basis with the board where I go and present a dashboard with the issues that we have. So you've got to know which forum you share the data in. And if there is not a forum, push for creating a one so that you can share your data and insights on what's happening on supply chain, again, on what needs to be shared.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Nabil. And finally, Panos, anything you wanted to add to all that? I know that lots of things have been covered there.
Never let a good crisis get wasted. Ever. To go back to that, a good crisis is a good opportunity to change things up, to give people visibility, to sensitize people on supply chain, to drive radical decisions fast, change specifications, qualify new suppliers, change raw and pack materials, because you have to. And sometimes it needs to get really tight for things to steer the ship in a very different direction. So yeah, never let a good crisis waste.
That's a very good point, actually. And I think we'd all recognize that certainly things like, well, COVID in particular, really 5 years ago, if you said supply chain, people say, what's that? Don't really understand. And now everyone knows kind of what shortages mean and so on. So that's some nice final words there. So thank you, all three of my guests, for some great insights there. Thanks to the audience, some nice comments. So the first Supply Chain Talk mug of 2025 will be going to Siobhan for a great question there. So thank you, Siobhan. Do keep those questions and comments coming in future episodes. So once again, let me say thank you.
By the way, we should all have one of those. Why don't I have one?
You must ask the producer. Our budget might stretch to it. We don't want to start a trend here. Okay, so the Valued Supply Chain Talk mug has been issued, and thank you. I'm not sure if I can give you a mug, but I can give you a big personal thanks to Chris Redding of Martin Brower, Mohammed Nabil from Nestle, and finally Panos Anastasiou of McCain Foods. Thank you, all three of you, for some great contributions there. Our next episode is next week, same time, on the 22nd of January. And the subject there, which is going to be hosted by Anna Maria Velika, is navigating the seasonal surge when you're at peak volume. So do tune in next week for that. Thank you again to my panelists, and thank you, audience, for joining us, and hope to see you next week. Goodbye.